What is up, K-Corner Podcast? How are we doing today? I'd like to officially welcome you to me starting my journey on YouTube. Obviously, I have 126 episodes in. I'm going to continue to upload on Spotify, Apple Music, all those platforms, but I'm going to transition to doing more videos on YouTube. I don't think all my podcasts will be live audio, recorded audio. I'm going to try and do a Monday preview of the Cincinnati and Michigan game, and I'm going to try and do that live. That should be pretty fun. Maybe it'll be Sunday. I'll keep you guys updated. But because the YouTube account takes 24 hours to be able to live stream on the application, I'm not available and I'm not able to upload. So doing a little bit differently here, like I said, I'm going to be focusing on the first half hour of content being put on here, being a YouTube upload, being live, and then all of my NFL takes, all of my Saturday college football takes, I'm going to continue to do off stream. So this is primarily for the half hour or so, 25-minute segment where I'm going to be previewing the Alabama and Cincinnati game. I'm so excited, so ready to start this journey with you guys on uploading consistently. I'm going to be probably doing this maybe once a week or so where I'll have the audio, but I don't know if I'm going to do the live video capture. So we'll see how this goes. If you guys do enjoy it, like and subscribe. I have a new YouTube account that I set up, K-Corner Podcast, as you're all familiar with. As always, you can look at Twitter and Facebook if you want any updates, anything that's coming along in this way. So without further ado, I'd really like to start going through the data because this is going to be, I think, a closer matchup than a lot of people think. I think we have some recency bias in how kind of everything got put together in terms of Alabama's season. So let me stop talking. I will go away from this. And all right, so you guys should be able to see me in that bottom left corner. I'm going to try to do a good job of not zooming in too far and stuff like that so you guys can still see the information with me in the bottom while I'm going through this. So first off, what are we looking at here? Alabama Crimson Tide, number one team in the country. Jumped Michigan in the rankings, went from number 3 in the country to number 1 in the country. They're 12-1 on the season. Their opponent's record, and so this is kind of where I'm going to get into some interesting little details. Their opponent's record is 89-66. It's really important to look at, hey, everyone talks about how difficult the SEC is. Everyone talks about how difficult some of the schedules were. What were their opponent's actual schedules? How well did they play? And if you see here, they were 89-66, but then when you look at your Power 5 opponents only playing Power 5 teams, so all of the 3 non-con games, all of the crappy little shitty games that you tend to have in every conference, like Michigan playing Western Michigan and stuff like that, I'm taking all of that out, pulling that out. And so if you look at kind of the schedule against, hey, these are real teams that can recruit, teams that can play with you, not money grab teams, this is what we're looking at 89 or 15-44. And then really what I wanted to focus on is how productive and how skillful and impactful was this Alabama team in their non-conference games and their conference games. So if you look at their conference games, they scored 298 points and allowed 195. That was in 9 games. They only scored 298. So when people talk about, well, there's a lot of great success, and we'll go through kind of the stats on some of these guys, how much did they really score in some of these games? A lot of the production came in their non-conference games. I have a sheet here with their schedule. So if you look, they beat Mercer 48-14. They beat Southern Miss 63-14. They beat New Mexico 59-3. And then obviously the drubbing of Miami, which was 44-13. And Miami wasn't a good team. I mean, Michigan State kicked the crap out of them and weren't really able to do a whole lot against that team. So that's where a lot of the offensive production and scoring came from. If you just look at the screen, I mean, in 4 games, 254. In 9 conference games, 298. Now you're expecting to see a dip off, but they only outscored their conference opponents by 103 points, and that includes facing teams like Florida, who was 6-6, not very good this year. Mississippi State, who was really the blowout. 40 of those 100 points came in 1 conference game. So when you look at, hey, was Alabama very dominant this year? I mean, just frankly, they weren't as dominant as we're used to seeing these teams be. Now scrolling across, we're going to preview Cincy. Fun fact about both of these teams is they both played Miami week 1. Obviously, Alabama played Miami U, and then Cincinnati played Miami of Ohio. I just thought that was an interesting fact. Like, hey, what's the odds that these teams meet up in the college football playoff, and they both played Miami? I just think that's a little fun fact. Moving on, we have Cincinnati Bearcats, 13-0, opponent record. So if you just look at simply opponent record, and without all the fluff and stuff, it is 77-80. So their conference opponents and non-conference, not just against the Power 5, was this is what happened. It got put on date. I was wondering why that was all messed up, and then I just switched back. 10 and 11. Dude, sorry. Number 10, 11. Alright, this is really starting to freak me out. Alright, I gotta go to text. Sorry, 1 second here. Knew something was gonna be a little messed up with this. Always is, right, when you're doing something for the first time. Alright, so like I said, their opponent record was 77-80, and then you look at opponent versus Power 5 record. I did the same thing. Obviously, they didn't play a lot of opponents against Power 5 teams, and I actually didn't count any of their non-Power 5 games because this record is worse, and I didn't count Mercer's win-loss record. I just didn't count non-Power 5 opponents, and you guys may say, well, that's a little biased or whatever, but go shit on yourself. They played Indiana, who was 0-10 against Power 5 teams, and they played Notre Dame, who was 9-1. Now, 9-1, and I'm going to get into the Notre Dame game specifically later on, but 9-1 with a close win against Florida State. They almost lost to Toledo. They beat Purdue by 2 scores, but a pick 6 at the end really changed the tide for them. So there's a lot of really, really, really close games when you look at this. SMU had 1 win against the Power 5 team. That was their only team that had a win against the Power 5 opponent other than Notre Dame. So their record and their team didn't play anyone difficult this year, and they really didn't dominate anyone. And you look at their 10 conference games, 322-131, almost 200 points of separation, but a lot of that came in a few games. They played Temple, which they won 52-3. They played UCF, which they won 56-21, and they beat really bad Tulane and South Florida teams 31-12 respectively and 45-28 respectively. And these are teams that are combined record. They have, UCF wasn't awful, but 8, 11, 13, 15 wins between 4 teams, and 8 of those come from 1 team, so not very good. You look at their out-of-conference 188-76. This includes Indiana team, which they struggled in that game. That game was a lot closer than the score indicates, which I'm also going to go through. And you look at kind of where this team is, and I think that what ended up happening is people overvalued the win against Notre Dame a bit, and so there wasn't real domination, unlike we're going to see when we look at Georgia-Michigan matchups, which there's some stumbling there too, but especially on Georgia's end on some really dominating performances. So everyone likes to talk about teams, and everyone's like, they may mention a few guys, but who makes this offense go? What style do they play? And what are they looking to do offensively, which is a scheme? And I think a lot of commentators either take 2 roads to look at this. If you go to YouTube, you see a lot of people looking at the big number analytics. This is the many yards per attempt. This is how their offense moves, and they're just looking at numbers from a lot of team standpoint. And I don't think they talk about the individual players enough. And it's like, I love numbers, obviously. Like, I'm a spreadsheet Excel guy, but at what point do you look at the individual players and how they're impactful and what they look like and how their team moves the ball? So Alabama is a yards-heavy team. You see Bryce Young, 4,323 yards, 68.9% completion percentage. So he's up there, almost 69%. Nice. But it's very efficient. He gets the ball out of his hands. He has 43 TDs, 4 interceptions. He doesn't run the ball that much, and he has been sacked this year. Only 31 total rushing yards and 3 rushing TDs. I think 2 of those are on QB sneaks, and another one was around the goal line. He isn't really a runner, which is something that you've kind of seen teams that have really explosive offenses that the quarterback can take off and run. Bryce Young really doesn't do that. He's more of a pocket presence who can get out and run, but he doesn't actively look to run. Obviously, Heisman winner, can't speak enough about this thing. This guy puts balls on the money. He's a very efficient guy, and he gets in and out of these throws very effectively. Moving on from that, Brian Robinson, 233 carries on the season, 1,071 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 4.8 per carry. So 14 touchdowns is pretty impressive when you look at rushing numbers and how many TDs you want to score. Whenever guys are in the mid to high teens and reaching 20, you know that they're looking to run the ball down in goal line situations. But this is one of those running teams, this is one of those Alabama teams that isn't a running offense. We saw it last year. I mean, Najee Harris, they could give it to him. That team was loaded. They could kind of do whatever they want with Mac Jones, Najee Harris, and all those guys. DeMonta Smith, obviously. And then you look at, hey, what have past Alabama teams done? And a lot of past Alabama teams have been able to run the ball effectively, use play action, and get it out to their guys. And this is not one of those traditional Alabama teams. So 1,000 yards, yes, but majority of that production was in some of the smaller games. He hasn't really ran well in any of the big matchups, and they've really relied on Bryce Young's arm to gain yards. And I'm going to talk about kind of what that ends up leading to is because this offensive line hasn't really played that well, even though they have top-end talent. So wide receivers, and this is going to wrap up my offense. I have one more guy to talk about, but wide receivers. I mean, Jameson Williams, he's going to be a first-rounder. Obviously, Bryce Young will probably be a first-rounder when he goes. Brian Robinson, he's an effective back, but when you look at where they're at in terms of, significance, you don't look at Brian Robinson as a guy that's being a game changer, which is why the Georgia Tech running back just announced via the transfer portal that he's going to be heading to Alabama after having a very, very good season. So Jameson Williams, 68 receptions. So 68 receptions with a 21.3 average. So this is your shot guy. This is the guy that is going to get over top of the defense. He's a speed. He's a burner. He returns kicks for them. I think he returns punts too. But this dude is lengthy, athletic, extremely, extremely fast. He has 1,145 yards and 15 TDs on the season. So what do all these stats tell me? Is this is their shot guy, not only that, but he is the guy that you need to double. This is the double guy. This is the guy that you can't let get over top of you, and you can't let Bryce Young have time because 68 receptions on the year and a 21.3 average. I mean, he's averaging 20 yards a reception. He's looking to push the ball down the field. You got to kind of treat him as this go route guy. If you think he's going to stutter and stop and get the underneath route, let him get the underneath route because you can't let him get over top of you because he's so fast and you're not going to catch him. And then John Metchi. I'm mentioning John Metchi even though he's out injured, he tore his ACL. He's still going to probably be a second or third rounder, maybe dip into the third a little bit more now because he's injured and I don't know if he'll be able to do all the workouts. But 96 receptions, 1,142 yards, 8 TDs, 11.9. So what does this mean? 96 receptions, almost 100 receptions on the year. And he has about the same yardage, a little bit less than Jameson Williams. Well, this is the guy that gets you your first downs. This is the guy that gets in and out of routes. And this is what I'm most scared about with this offense. Everyone's like, well, Alabama can just pick up right where they left off. They have a bunch of 5 stars. There's a reason why Jameson Williams is a transfer from Ohio State. They were concerned about their wide receiver depth going into this year. Now, there's a bunch of guys, and some of them have been banged up this year, and hopefully they get healthy in the next few weeks, or over the course of the last few weeks and going into the game. But the first down getter, the guy that's getting in and out of short contested routes, that's catching the difficult balls, that is reliable, that Bryce Young has a relationship with, that's who John Metchi was. And so when you take a guy like that out of the lineup, it can impact things. Now, they do have time to work on it. Bring a new guy in there. But we go from 68 and 96 to a guy that has 32 receptions. Slade Bolden, white guy, slot guy. I think he's right around 5'10". He's a little guy. He's a little jitterbug at times. He's more of a blocker. He's strong. But 32 receptions, 332 yards, 2 TDs, 10.4 yards a reception. This is scary if you're an Alabama fan. I think that they'll be able to do a bunch of things against Cincinnati, but this is Alabama's looking at that drop-off when you go to number 3. Is can a guy step up? Will this offense be able to challenge this talented secondary from Cincinnati, which I know they're not playing against the biggest competition, but they are a talented secondary, which I'm 100% going to get into. But Slade Bolden is your next guy up in the windmill, or the next guy up to kind of fill those roles. And then they have tight ends that they use pretty effectively, but it'll be interesting to see how this team really looks. And then their last key offensive player is their left tackle. He's going to be a first-round draft pick, Evan Neal. And this line, you can't think about other Alabama lines. We can't think of this team as, they're another really, really dominant Alabama team. When I get into these games and these scores, you guys will understand what I'm talking about. So they don't run the ball great. They can pass the ball, but they're out their leading receiver basically in receptions and their first down getter. So I think there's some concerns for this Alabama team. Now, moving on to defense. This defense is aggressive, fast, and loaded, but they sometimes face weird. They get into lulls. I think they get lulled into a sense of how good they are, and that can sometimes hurt them. Will Anderson, that's the guy that you guys need to know. Obviously, he's going to be the guy disrupting plays left, right, and center. He plays outside linebacker position. 91 tackles on the season, 15 and a half sacks, 2 passes deflected. He is a pass rusher. He is a tackle for loss guy. He is a fast, aggressive guy who's looking to blow up. Cincinnati runs a lot of RPOs, and it's going to be interesting to see how Will Anderson speeds up the decision-making of Desmond Ridder in this matchup. They have a very talented secondary, although there's some young guys in it. Brian Branch, Josh Jobe, 41, 38 tackles, not really used in the rush game at all. 7 passes deflected, 4 passes deflected. Whenever you see those numbers, you think they're getting the passing lanes and teams need to pass on them. Henry Tuowo, this guy is their leading tackler, absolute freak linebacker. He's probably going in the 3rd round. But he's played, and he was a transfer out of Tennessee, and this guy will really change the way this defense has looked. He only has 4 sacks, so he's not necessarily getting out after the quarterback that much, but he's a run stopper. He clogs up that interior. He's a bigger guy. Jordan Battle, another guy in the secondary, 74 tackles on the season, so this is their safety. He tackles a bit more than these other cornerbacks, obviously, but he's more of an aggressive, rolling and roaming guy. He only has 3 interceptions on the year with 3 passes defended. And then you get to another lineman, Fedarian Mathis, 46 tackles on the year, 8 sacks. So this is the guy that you're going to look at on the opposite end of Will Anderson. If Will Anderson isn't getting pressured, if Cincinnati goes, hey, we're going to double team this guy and not let him impact the game, expect Fedarian Mathis to have himself a really nice game. And then Jalen Amar Davis is the last guy in the secondary. He has 4 passes defended, 3 interceptions. So this isn't necessarily a ball-hawking group as much as Cincinnati is, which I'll talk about. But this is a very trained secondary that are able to, with the scheme that they're running, is they let teams kind of get to under stuff, but they're not looking to get beat over the top. They run a cover 3, cover 4 hybrid, which they ran for a long time with Nick Saban over there, and they look to keep things in front and play a heavy zone concept. They will go one-on-one man concepts a lot, but they usually have a man over the top, and I think that you may see a lot more of that to try and generate pressure, as none of these receivers for Cincinnati I don't think can challenge these guys as much as you maybe want them to. I'm going to get, you can probably see some games and game stats like that at the bottom, but I'm going to go over that later. So moving on to Cincinnati, I talked about their record, and now it's time to talk about their players. So Desmond Ridder had a lot of talk at the beginning of the year for some Heisman candidacy, and I don't think this guy's as great as everyone makes him out to be. I've watched him play a lot. Obviously, being in the Midwest, being from the Midwest, you get a lot of these Cincinnati games on, and you watch them because they're playing other MAC schools and stuff like that. And he hasn't impressed me either year that I've necessarily watched him get after it. He participates in a heavy RPO scheme. He threw for 3,190 yards, 65.9 completion percentage, 30 TDs to 8 interceptions. He does run the ball a good bit, 361 rushing yards and 6 rushing TDs. So this isn't a guy that you can abandon at the line of scrimmage. This is a guy you have to follow all the way down. Jerome Ford is their running back. 19 TDs. When they get in the red zone, they shorten up their play calling a whole lot because RPOs are much more difficult to run when everything's contained, and so they run the ball a lot. 200 attempts this year for 1,242 yards, 19 TDs and a 6.2 average. He has the ability to hit the home run ball. This Cincinnati team is going to try and run against Alabama. I don't know how well that's going to match up, but they're going to try and run, and Jerome Ford is the guy to be paying attention to in this attempt. And this offense, I would say, at times scuttles. When Desmond Ridder, he has an accuracy waves in games, and I'm going to try and show you some of those games, but he has games where he just simply can't throw the ball effectively. He can't make quick decisions, and it slows and stagnates this offense. Usually around the second quarter heading into half, this offense wakes up, and then in the third quarter, they're usually full steam ahead, which is where you see separation in a lot of these games. Wide receiver, Alec Pierce is their leading receiver, 50 receptions, 867 yards, and 8 TDs. Like I said, this offense isn't hugely productive, isn't hugely massive plays like you see some of the stats that Alabama had, 2 receivers, both over 1,000 yards. But they're effective, and they get their big chunk plays. You see 17.3 yards. They're looking to get RPO schemes where they're getting slant and slot and go routes on single defenders, and they try and win. And in the AAC, they were able to win consistently. Tyler Scott is their second leading receiver, 447 yards, 5 TDs, as you can see there, 18.3 average. So these two guys are your guys that are your go routes, are your guys that stretch the field a lot. And then Josh Wiley. This is a tight end, but this is someone you need to look at. He's going to get drafted because he's an incredible player. He's looking and projected as a second to third round guy. 25 receptions, 320 yards, 6 TDs, 12.8. He goes down, and he is a guy that they check down to a lot. They late release him, similar to how Michigan runs their concept. Sorry, burp, I apologize. This is definitely, he's a really, really good inline blocker as well. So this is a guy offensively that keeps things churning for him. But Desmond Ridder is someone who I think with these weapons, I don't know how well they're going to compete against Alabama's defense that is fast and aggressive. So moving on to Cincinnati's defense. Yeah, they are a ball-hawking, extremely quick, extremely fast secondary. Joel Bolano, leading tackler, 106 yards, 5.5 sacks. He is a linebacker, outside linebacker type edge player. He gets after the quarterback a bit, but this offense or this defense really sits back in their concepts a lot. Doesn't really rush the passer. Uses different schemes and multiple schemes to get after the passer. They don't have a guy like Will Anderson that's a pure game wrecker. They do have some really, really good players though. Ahmed Gardner, first or second round draft pick. Ahmed, you may have seen him, Sauce Gardner. He hasn't allowed a TD ever in single coverage in his career. 44 tackles, 3 sacks. They will bring him on corner blitz. He's an extreme athlete. He's a D1 caliber athlete playing on the Cincinnati squad. He has 7 passes defended and 3 interceptions. You'd be like, ball hawking, what do you mean? He only has 3 interceptions. That's because teams don't throw his way. He usually locks teams down. So that's why I'm saying that front 7-wise, I think this is a skilled front 7. I think Alabama's line might be able to push him around. But if you think Jameson Williams is probably going to be running up and down, no, there's another first-round corner on the other side just across from Jameson Williams. And it'll be interesting to see that matchup. I'm super excited to watch it because Ahmed Gardner hasn't been challenged this year with an elite wide receiver with who they played. Indiana really struggled quarterbacking-wise, Penix coming off his injury, and Notre Dame doesn't really have that guy. So this is where we're really going to see, hey, is he a first-round guy or is he a second-round guy that was playing against weaker competition and just was very, very good against him? I think I'm going to love watching that matchup. Kobe Bryant, another secondary, 11 passes defended. This secondary, like I said, they get in passing lanes. They play a lot of press man. They play a lot of solo ball, and because Ahmed Gardner is so good, they let other guys be a little bit less aggressive because he's basically shutting down whoever's he on in the AAC, and these guys can be a little bit more aggressive because they're going to have secondary help because Gardner is so good. Curtis Brooks, this is another pass rush guy on the outside that gets after quarterback, 7.5 sacks on the season, which isn't bad, but this is a pure rusher. He's athletically, I think he's 6'6" and a freak. It'll be interesting to see how this pass rushing group lets up between or against an offensive line against Alabama that isn't necessarily great. And Arquan Bush is another guy in the secondary. So Gardner, Bryant, and Bush are the 3 dudes to really look at that they're very skilled. And Bryant and Bush are not upperclassmen. I believe they're both sophomores. And so it'll be interesting to see how this group kind of handles playing against a higher level caliber of receivers, but 6 passes defended, 3 picks. This is a turnover heavy squad. I have in the top right corner up here, if you see my green little box, third overall in turnovers. They had 18 picks on the season, 15 forced fumbles. And you look over at this Alabama team, they have 15 picks on the season, 5 forced fumbles. So even though Will Anderson has 15 and a half sacks, not a lot of turnovers. They're 33rd overall in turnovers. And that's, you can live and die by turnovers. I don't think turnovers are necessarily the implication of a very good defense. I think it's an indication that your team uses turnovers and they play a specific brand of football that allows them to do that, because the way that Ahmed Gardner plays, a lot of these other guys can go after and get it. Majai Sanders is an edge rusher. He's an athletic freak. He's been on and off injured, so hopefully in the next few weeks he can let me close this. I don't want to see any of these updates. Sorry. If you look at who this Alabama or Cincinnati team is they're not necessarily a pass rushing fiasco team, but if Majai Sanders gets healthy, he only had 15 tackles and 2.5 sacks. This is a guy that can get after the quarterback. He has long, lengthy arms, 5 passes defended on the year, and this is really the game ruiner, the game wrecker that could be for Cincinnati. Like I said, he's projected probably a first round, and that's who we're going to be seeing kind of, hey, if someone can make a big difference, if someone can take a step and the Cincinnati team has a chance, it's going to come from their defense getting turnovers. It's going to come from their defense playing consistent, getting pressure on Bryce Young, and it's going to come from at least Ahmed Gardner shutting down one of the receivers. So now I want to look at key games, because I can talk about all these stats, and what are the games? What are the actual physical games, tough games, close games, where they needed to get it. So Alabama, it starts off, I probably have to scroll up a little bit more. Yeah. So Alabama, they've had a lot of close games, and that's what I want to make sure everyone knows. This is not a blowout every single team Alabama team. This isn't last year's Alabama team. This is an Alabama team that struggles on the road, it seems, and isn't necessarily great in neutral site games. So Florida. This is Bryce Young's stat line. 22 of 35, 240 yards, 3 TDs, 2 sacks. It was a 29-31 game. So they played Florida. Florida has a capable offense, not a great offense, and they let up 29 points. He was sacked twice in this game. Their offense, they got up really big early. I believe it was 14-0 in the first quarter, and they didn't finish games. That's something that's a product of this culture that's in Alabama, is they haven't finished many games, especially when they think they're much better than their opponent and they get up early. You saw it in Miami where they kind of shut down. You saw it against Florida. And you saw it against LSU, where LSU still had a chance to win even though Alabama was playing much better. Arkansas, Bryce Young, 31 of 40. So, they're really going after attempts here. You see these attempts, 559 yards, 5 TDs, but he was sacked 4 times. So he had all of that offensive production, 559 yards, 5 TDs, and they scored 42 points. And 42 points is good, but that Arkansas defense isn't great. And they relied on the arm of Bryce Young, his accuracy, him being able to do it. 31 of 40 is incredible, 559 yards, able to take shot, but still only 42 points. That's a lot of yardage for only 42 points. If you're getting 550 yards, you think you'd be getting, 50, 60 points. And I think that a lot of teams kind of play this Alabama team as, hey, don't let them get their shots, play everything in front, and try to make them force stuff in the red zone with Bryce Young. A&M, this is the game they lost, 28 of 48 for completion, 369 yards, 3 TDs, interception, sacked 4 times. They scored 38 points. Again, a lot of yards, 369 yards, 3 TDs, INT, but 28 of 48. And this is the only game outside of Auburn where teams have really slowed Bryce Young down, not being able to complete their passes, and it was their one loss. Get in those throwing lanes, rush them up with pressure. 4 sacks. This is the stat that I want you to look at. 4 sacks. They disrupted his timing. They disrupted everything that was going for him. And they ended up losing a very, very close game where they had a chance to win at the end. But Bryce Young was not consistent in this game. A lot of people questioned Bryce Young after this game, said that he failed, he missed some open receivers, stuff like that. And getting a younger quarterback off of his feet, he's very similar to C.J. Stroud in this, is forcing him to move, forcing him to, make quicker decisions. And you can see some bubbles in this lineup. And we go LSU, 24 of 37, 302 yards, 2 TDs, 0 INTs, 4 sacks. Again, when he's getting sacked and pressured, 20 points. Your quarterback throws for 302 yards and 2 TDs, and you only have 20 points. This is what I mean when the run game isn't necessarily there in their big game. The running back may have 1,000 yards, but it isn't impacting in these important games. They're solely relying on Bryce Young. And I think that a lot of things, when you just look at stats and they say, oh, Alabama has a nice run game, I think they're thinking about past people, because Alabama's run game is not good and it isn't used at all in these SEC matchups. They're literally relying on Bryce Young here. Auburn game, 25 of 51, less than 50% completion percentage, 317 yards, 2 TDs, an INT, 7 sacks. And if Auburn had a better offense, and if Bo Nix was more capable, or Bo Nix might have been injured. Yeah, Bo Nix was injured. If they had a more capable offense, Auburn, they win this game. They held Alabama, and it was really Alabama scoring points, and it went into 4 overtime. So this wasn't even really official. I think it ended 14-14 or 13-13 at the end of overtime, and then they had to go for 2 and scored in overtime games. But 7 sacks. This offensive line got absolutely mauled. Bryce Young holds on to the ball for a long time, and when you can't run the ball against this team, if you can't run the ball against this and against defenses, I think that you can start rushing the passer more aggressively. I think you see that through a bunch of different ways, and then you can get after Bryce Young, who, like I said, he can run and he can maneuver, but he isn't a running quarterback. And then in Georgia, right? Everyone talks about the beatdown in Georgia. What ended up happening? Georgia, 26 of 44, 421 yards, 3 TDs, 0 sacks. That's the key here. 0 sacks. All of these games are close except for this one, and it's a big matchup against Georgia. And these numbers aren't, much better than some other games. You look at Arkansas, you look at A&M, you look at LSU, 302. He did have a lot more yards here, but what happened? There was a pick 6 that you got to remember. They took points often and early, and it became a blowout because Georgia had to keep going for it. They were gifted 10 points in this game. So this game was a lot closer than it indicated, because you had a pick 6, you had Georgia go for it from their own, 28 or 30-yard line, and both of those converted into 10 points. So those were 10 points, and I'm not saying that, but this offense, we have to recharacterize on how efficient and how big it is. It scored a lot against really bad teams, but when you look at these matchups, Florida is stagnated. Arkansas, I won't say necessarily stagnated. They went back and forth there. A&M is stagnated. LSU is stagnated. Auburn is stagnated. And in Georgia, they scored on 5 straight possessions and didn't score the rest of the game outside of the pick six, or outside of a field goal at the end on a turnover. So this offense isn't necessarily great, and they are relying solely on Bryce Young here. He is averaging 410 yards in all their close games, 3 TDs, 0.4 INT, almost 4 sacks a game, and if you take that Georgia game out, it's probably closer to 4.5, 5, and they're only scoring 32 points a game. So their quarterback is scoring 21 points himself, right? And they're only averaging 32 total on average. And their team is letting up 27.2 points per game. Teams are able to score against them, and these are not great offenses. You look at LSU and Auburn, those are not great offenses, they were able to score. You look at Florida, not great offenses, and they were able to score. Arkansas and A&M are good offenses, but not great, and Georgia isn't a great offense. I think that they haven't really faced a top-tier offense this whole entire year. You can talk about Tennessee, but I think Tennessee picks on teams that they're much better than versus teams that they aren't as good as. I think they struggle on getting those RPO schemes out, and they have defended RPO schemes well this year, and so it should be an interesting matchup. But this team isn't tremendous defensively, 27.2 points. Now they get some blowout games, and their defense looks a little bit better, but when you get down into the tape, this team is letting up good amount of points, and they're not scoring at a high clip of 410 yards, right? If your offense, and this is kind of what Ohio State has, is they're able to march the ball down the field, but then in the red zone, when windows tighten, they settle for field goals a lot, which this team is very good at doing. The Cincinnati team is very good. So when some people say, it's going to be a blowout, I think this could possibly be a matchup. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to be 100% a win, 100% it's going to be a blowout, but I'm just saying that we can't give it up, because Alabama comes into this game coming off their highest win of the season that they feel great about. Right? Anytime you feel, you win your biggest rivalry, you win your playing game, you have so much emotion, you get off your high, and we just got Cincinnati, this AAC school. Now, Nick Saban, for a long part, talks about this a lot, that because you're at Alabama, the media, feast the flames of, hey, your team's so good, your team is this and that. And I don't think that you can necessarily dictate that, hey, yep, that makes sense to me. So we kind of sometimes got to take a step back on, hey, we're pushing this team up a little bit when they aren't necessarily not that good, but I'm just saying that you got to pump the brakes a little bit because the story indicates that, hey, let's not forget that some teams have really done some things against them. And now we have Cincinnati. Sorry, I'm just going to look at how long we've been going. We're already past 34 minutes, so this is a bit longer. And then I'm going to give you guys an overall recap on what teams need to do and stuff like that. But digging into the numbers again, we're looking at the big games and the close games for this Cincinnati squad. So Indiana, Desmond Ridder was 20 of 36, 210 yards, 1 TD, 1 INT, 2 sacks. Pretty pedestrian storyline. They ended up winning by 14. But if you watch that game, I think Indiana got stopped in the red zone 4 times. 3 of them they didn't kick field goals on. So this game really was a lot closer than 14 points indicate. I think a late pick 6. I think they had 4 turnovers. Indiana did in this game, which is in part to a very aggressive defense, but Indiana wasn't a very good team, and they played the Cincinnati squad really, really, really close, and I think at the time we thought Indiana was going to be pretty good, and they marked it up as a key win. Notre Dame, 19 of 32, 297 yards, 2 TDs, 0 INTs, 1 sack. Now, what we have to indicate is that this Notre Dame team is not the same Notre Dame team at the end of the year. And even the Notre Dame team at the end of the year didn't play anyone. And this was really the matchup that people were like, oh, Cincinnati has to be in the playoff now. This Notre Dame team was playing like 4 or 5 different guys. If you listen to Tommy Reese, who's on a podcast, Chicago Barstool Chicago one, which those guys are really funny and great. If you haven't checked them out, I'd recommend checking them out. But Notre Dame, 19, he wasn't great, and this offense wasn't great. And this team is important, and they rely heavily on their defense getting stops, their defense giving the ball. I think 2 more interceptions in this game. I think they're averaging, I looked it up, I didn't end up adding it, but they're averaging something along the lines in all of these games, like 2.5 or 3 turnovers. And that's good, but when you start playing better teams like Alabama, who aren't prone to turning the ball over really at all, things start to tighten up here, and that's some of the things that we have to indicate. Now we have Navy. Navy, 18 of 30, 176 yards, 2 TDs, 1 INT, 1 sack. I mean, Navy had a chance to win this game. Navy wasn't very good this year, and I think this is 2 parts into Cincinnati. I don't think they're a great team. Honestly, I don't think they're a very good team. I think they've been overvalued all year because of an early win. I think that if they're any other team in the country, and they aren't ranked high at the beginning of the year, they don't get in. I think if Oklahoma State wins, Oklahoma State gets in, and I think that this game could either go one of 2 ways, is that we see that Cincinnati is exposures or Alabama doesn't take them seriously because there's nothing to show from the numbers that this Cincinnati team is great, and that's why the number in line is 14. Now, I will say some things that Cincinnati can do to disrupt them, but I just don't think it's been proven. Tulsa, 15 of 23, 274 yards, 2 TDs, 1 INT, 3 sacks. Desmond Ridder isn't great in these big games. He doesn't show that he's an elite arm talent. I mean, their offense is scoring. They didn't score 40 in any of these games, and none of these teams are great. Their defense, who a lot of people say is very, very good, is still allowing 19 points a game against a pedestrian schedule. Indiana, who is an awful offense, scored 24 on this team. Granted, that was still when Michael Penix was in the lineup. But it's not like they were great, and they moved the ball very efficiently on this Cincinnati squad. Houston, he was 11 of 1,790 yards, 3 TDs, and 1 sack. So he's averaging in these matchups 229 yards, 2 TDs, 0.6 interceptions, and 1.6 sacks. I mean, obviously pressure hasn't been on him, and I don't think that you can look at this squad and think to yourself, hey, this is a squad that deserves to be in the CFP. They haven't played well all year. They haven't blown anyone out. I mean, if you look at their lineup and you look at who they blew out, like I said, UCF, They ran a train on. That was the only winning team that had a winning record that was at all good that they blew out. I mean, everyone else, East Carolina, 35-13. That game was close going in the second half. I mean, Houston's pretty good, 35-20. In the championship game, they did blow out SMU. I didn't add SMU, 48-14. They won. SMU's 8-4. Not a horrible team. Pretty good SMU squad. But when you look at who this team is they are a team that has busted coverages sometimes. Defenses can go over the top of this team. Ahmed Gardner is by far their best player on this lineup. They don't generate pressure from a single pass rusher, and I don't think that bodes well for matching up with Alabama. So this is where my prediction and stuff are going to come in. Now, I'm not a sports betting guy. Don't take this advice to be sports betting. I am a guy giving you guys information. I just wanted to kind of shine a light on, hey, who are players to watch? Who are guys that I need to be aware of when watching this game? If I'm looking to bet this game, where would I kind of look to see some indications on where we're at? So, Alabama is a very singular team. They need to pass the ball, which bodes well for a Cincinnati Bearcats team that has some very good, very aggressive cornerbacks. If a team is going to throw the ball 40 to 45 times, there's more likely going to be some interceptions and some forced fumbles and some strip sacks and stuff like that. So that bodes well for Cincinnati. What I do think, though, is that Cincinnati hasn't faced a line, even though Alabama's line isn't very good. I don't think they faced a rushing attack at the same level as Alabama has. Alabama ran the ball decently effective, 100 yards, like 4.5 carries against Georgia. I think that this Alabama team is getting a game plan to take the ball out of Bryce Young's hands. You do not want to throw a ton on the secondary. Are there yards to gain on the secondary? Absolutely. But this secondary is so ball hawking that they're going to get turnovers and their linemen get their hands up really, really well. So I think Alabama's going to go into this team running the ball effectively, hoping in play-action passing, and hoping that they can get Jameson Williams open. They don't have another huge receiver. Now, they have a plethora, and this is not to get confused, they have a plethora of really talented guys sitting on that bench that were playing behind, a first and a second/third round pick. So there's guys there, but can they develop the same connection that John Metchi has, or does their offense take a step back? Now, Alabama, defensively, they're going to get after the quarterback. They're going to try and ruin the rhythm of Cincinnati's offense. If Alabama can do that, which with Will Anderson and Fedarian Mathis, I think they can get after Desmond Ridder and put him under pressure. And Ridder struggled in some of these matchups. It wasn't necessarily just the sacks because he's pretty athletic. It's getting him off of his line, getting him off of his timing that really affects the way the Cincinnati Bearcat offense can push the ball because they want to run a ton of plays. They're the Tennessee type. And so I think this defense matches up extremely well to stop the Cincinnati team. So I think points are going to be at the premium. I don't think that this is going to be a blowout in the terms of it's 42 to 7. I think it's going to be a blowout where Alabama ends up rolling in the second half and taking over with their supreme dominance physically. And I think that you can kind of see a mesh point where it's going to be kind of how it's like a 14-3 or 14-7 game at half, and then Alabama ends up rolling away with it just because of the physical aspects, and these cornerbacks end up getting burned. They get a little grab happy, a little bit pass happy, and this Alabama team is coached really well. But I can also see this happening is that Cincinnati finds some big plays. They're a big play-finding team. They gash you in the run game and spread you out, and they're looking to get one-on-ones. And they look to get shots. Like I said, 17 and 18 yards a carry, 17 and 18 yards per completion, 6.2 yards per carry. So this is a team that gets shots, gets huge plays. And Cincinnati can take these shots, and if Alabama's offense gets into a rhythm of having to throw the ball, Cincinnati's front seven can stop them, can come in there and force them to become singular dimensional, force them to throw the ball 50 times. You're going to get a few turnovers, you're going to get a few chances and opportunities, and you have to pressure the quarterback. Georgia thought that they could get pressure with 4, and it did not work, and Bryce Young had time and diced them apart. Cincinnati, if they want to win this game, has to pressure Bryce Young, get him off of his line, because this line has shown that they can do that, and I think where Alabama's defense is very well managed to stop this Cincinnati Bearcats defense. I think the Cincinnati Bearcats defense is well managed to stop this team who's only averaging 32 points in these big matchup, these big conference games. And when you really look at it, a Georgia game that had 0 points, but you look at this stretch near the end of the season, right, going into crunch time, LSU and Auburn, 20 and 24 points, and 24 points in 4 overtimes. Those were the 2 times where this offense got kind of figured out. They became stagnant. They relied on 48 throws, 37 throws, 51 throws. And look at the sack numbers, 4, 4, and 7. That is what you have to try and generate against this Alabama Crimson Tide group. Now, Are they going to be ready to play? Most likely. Could they come out and absolutely shit stain on the Cincinnati Bearcats team? Yes. Do I think that's going to happen? Who knows? But what I will say is that everyone who wants to immediately write this game off is Cincinnati is a team that is designed to go after a team that wants to throw the ball 50 times. They're designed to go after a team that lets some pressures because they're going to dial up weird, unique pressures because they had skilled guys on the outside that can manage the ball. And I think this is going to be a lower scoring game. And I think a lot of people are counting out the Cincinnati Bearcats team too early. And I'm not saying this is going to be a close game, right? I'm not saying that I think Alabama dominates, but is like 14-7. There's some red zone struggles at this Alabama team that no one wants to talk about. That when you have 559 yards, 42 points, 369 yards, 38 points, 302 yards, 20 points, 317 yards, 24 points, 420 yards, and guess what? They were gifted 10 of those points. So really, they moved the ball down the field and scored 31 points on 421 passing yards and 3 TDs. This is not an efficient Alabama squad. A lot of their numbers get blown up because of out-of-conference play. So when you look at who they faced, I don't think that this Alabama team is as good as everyone makes them out to be. We're recency bias. We're like, they had to be good. Obviously they're good because when they played Georgia, they looked so good. But it's like, when they get on the main stage and they're playing an opponent that no one thinks is better than them, that they're 14-point favorites against, does this Cincinnati Bearcat team shock them? I think there's an opportunity with the way that they match up, but it's going to come from INTs, good field positioning, and Cincinnati taking points. If Cincinnati gets aggressive and doesn't take points, now you're going to have to score touchdowns, I agree, but like if you get a turnover and you take a shot play, you miss on it, and you're like in the 20-yard line, you run the ball, you do all these things, and you're in field goal range, which Cincinnati has an awful kicking unit, by the way. So it'll be interesting to see how aggressive they get during this game because their kickers sucked this year. I think they're on their third kicker, and they missed a few field goals in the Houston game too. So that's another thing, is that Alabama hands down has special teams. I think defensively they both match up decently well. Does Bryce Young have time? And does Jameson Williams get open? Because I don't know down the line, unless we get introduced to someone, on who's going to win in and out every single rep. That is, make them singular dimensional, force them to throw the ball a lot, be grab happy. Don't let Jameson Williams get behind you. That's the sandpat for how Cincinnati wins this game. For how Alabama wins this game is make Desmond Ridder's life terrible and don't let up the big play. They're both big play offenses. They both push the ball downfield. But this Desmond Ridder squad can look inept at times against Houston and Navy and stuff. So I think Cincinnati's a little overvalued, but I think that their defense could stand up to this Alabama Crimson Tide offense who's getting overvalued over a one-game little instance where they had good field position the entire time because their defense played well. And does this defense shut them down? I think they do. I think if I had to give a score prediction, I would say it's in the mid-20, 25 to not 25, but 27. They settle for 2 field goals, so they don't get to 28. 27-14 is where I think this game probably ends. And maybe I'm going to be wholly wrong, but the way that this Alabama team scores, they don't score well, and they get slowed down in the red zone, and I think losing a guy like John Metchi also hurts that. Now, return game, Cincinnati might want to punt it out of bounds every time and kick it out of bounds every time because Jameson Williams is a real threat to score every time he touches the ball. So I thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Let me know if you guys like this. Like I said, my new YouTube channel is coming out, but I appreciate everything and all the support that you guys have given me. So you guys have a wonderful Christmas season as you guys listen and upload on this podcast. My job here is done. We ran about 45 minutes. I appreciate you guys. As always, you have a wonderful Christmas season. And the corners have been painted, but you can check out the rest of my review where I do predictions and stuff like that on Spotify.